Sienna Blake moved quietly along the polished marble floor of the city's most prestigious art museum, blending into the shadows as she performed her final checks before the midnight unveiling. She wore her usual uniform, plain, functional work pants and a faded navy jacket smudged with spots of paint and a few tiny tears. Her dark hair was tucked back into a simple ponytail, strands curling loose around her face as she adjusted a loose wire near a light fixture. The guests milling around in extravagant gowns and tuxedos barely spared her a glance, as if she were part of the scenery, just another fixture of the background. The air was thick with the buzz of whispered critiques and soft laughter, champagne glasses tinkling against sleek tables adorned with minimalist floral arrangements. Sienna overheard snippets of conversation about brushstroke techniques and art market values, all in voices a little too sharpened with disdain when they drifted her way. At one point, a woman with carefully painted nails glanced at Sienna's worn shoes and smirked, muttering, "Can you believe she's working here? What's she even doing in this room?" The nearby security guard laughed softly and said, "Probably doesn't even know what's on the walls." Sienna kept her eyes down, nodding politely when spoken to, careful to avoid drawing unwanted attention. She knew her place. Her heavy accent marked her as an outsider in this world of polished accents and private collections, and that was just fine with her. This was always just a job, nothing more. Then, without warning, a loud crack shattered the hum of conversation. The overhead light fixture above the centerpiece exploded, rain of glass shards glittering as they scattered through the air. A sudden burst of smoke unfurled from the tangled wires, and gasps rippled through the stunned crowd. Panic stirred at the edges as the elegant unveiling turned chaotic in an instant. The sharp explosion sliced through the delicate hum of the gallery, startling everyone into a sudden stillness before chaos erupted. Glass tinkled like ice cubes falling into a glass, and the sharp scent of burnt wiring filled the air. Guests instinctively shrank away from the center sculpture, their eyes wide with shock and confusion as shards sparkled near their feet. Some clutched their gowns and handkerchiefs, others blinked against the unexpected mess interrupting the carefully orchestrated evening. The museum staff stood paralyzed around the edges, murmuring anxiously among themselves while the museum director, a middle-aged man with silver hair and a fastidious suit, barked orders that dissolved into thin air. Security personnel tried to maintain composure but looked to one another, uncertain who should take charge. One assistant raised his voice to call for help, but it was drowned out by the nervous murmurs and escalating voices of the guests. Sienna Blake's heart hammered, not from fear, but from instinct. A pulse of determination pushed her forward, feet moving methodically under the cascade of glittering glass fragments. In the face of frozen uncertainty, she stepped in, her voice both steady and firm, cutting through the rising panic. "Everyone, please back away calmly from the sculpture," she said clearly, directing two nearby attendants who had just come to their senses. "Help me rope off this area. Use caution tape, it's over by the storage closet." Her accent, thick but precise, carried an authority that unsettled some of the elite guests, who exchanged skeptical glances. Yet her calm in the chaos demanded attention. A young man in a crisp black suit, obviously a museum intern, hesitated. "Shouldn't we wait for security? Or the fire brigade?" he asked uncertainly. "Call them now," Sienna said briskly. She motioned to another attendant, who pulled out a phone and began dialing. Meanwhile, she scanned the room quickly and spotted the red fire extinguisher mounted beside a side door near the snack bar. "Someone, grab that extinguisher, please. The wires are smoking, we need to stop this from spreading," she ordered, already moving toward the extinguisher herself. The attendant nearest the door handed it over, and without hesitation, Sienna bent to examine the source of the problem. Blackened wires writhed slightly with sparks, smoke curling upward toward the high ceiling. "Use the extinguisher on the wires, not on the guests," she explained to the hesitant museum guards gathered around who eyed the situation with growing alarm. Her hands worked with careful precision, releasing the foam's hiss as the fire began to dampen. Each burst of the extinguisher snuffed out sparks, and the smoke slowed its spread, the flames shrinking under her control. Meanwhile, she noticed an elderly woman wavering near a tall sculpture covered with drooping tulips, her face pale and lips trembling. Sienna moved swiftly across scattered glass pieces, steady despite balancing herself carefully, and gently took the woman's arm. "You should come with me. It's safer near the exits," Sienna said with a reassuring voice, her warmth grounding amidst the frenzy. The woman blinked, hesitant at first but relieved. "Thank you, dear," she murmured. Sienna led her toward a side door where a few guests were gathering under soft emergency lighting, away from shards and smoke. Nearby, a small child clung to his mother's skirt, eyes wide with fright and ears ringing from the explosion. Sienna crouched down, making eye contact. "It's okay," she said. "We're safe now. We'll get you out quickly." The boy's grip loosened slightly, and Sienna lifted him into her arms, moving toward the exit with steady steps. The murmurs of doubt from the higher-tier guests turned to curious stares as Sienna's decisiveness changed the tone. Whispers of, "Look how she's handling this," and "Maybe she knows what she's doing," began to creep through the crowd. The security guard who had laughed at her earlier sputtered, caught off guard by her competence. Minutes passed, and the smoke finally thinned. The fire blazed low, subdued beneath the foam. Emergency responders arrived, rushing past the crowd behind a barricade Sienna helped enforce. She briefed them quickly, pointing to the site of the overheated wires and confirming no one else was hurt. An EMT who stepped forward to check on guests nodded at Sienna. "You're calm under pressure, nice work." His respect was evident, yet she barely acknowledged it, already guiding a few guests away from the immediate danger. Some guests, previously rattled and frightened, whispered thanks as she passed. A sharply dressed woman, clutching her designer bag, stopped her. "You were amazing, so composed." Most of us froze in place. Sienna offered a brief, tired smile. "Everyone wants to feel safe. It sometimes just takes one person to start helping." Her words were simple, but firm. As the security director finally took actual control of the situation, clearing the hall and beginning damage assessment, guests slowly began to collect themselves. What had started as a horrific incident was now a managed event, in no small part because of Sienna's steady decisions. The mocking voices faded entirely. No one dared dismiss the quiet woman who had controlled the chaos. Instead, eyes fixed on her as she moved calmly through the crowd, directing evacuation toward an open side exit and ensuring anxious attendees were accounted for. Inside her mind, Sienna remained focused on practical tasks, checking that no one was trapped, making sure paths to exits were clear, and communicating with staff to assist where necessary. Even surrounded by polished art and wealthy faces, she had become the most crucial element of the night's unfolding drama. At last, the museum director, flustered but relieved, approached her. "Ms. Blake, your quick thinking saved lives tonight. I can't thank you enough." She nodded with quiet dignity. "Just doing my job," she replied, the familiar understatement cushioning the weight of the moment. Guests whispered among themselves, some capturing videos on their phones, others commenting on the unexpected hero in their midst. For the first time, Sienna noticed the eyes that had once ignored or scorned her were now filled with surprise and respect. Despite the noise slowly returning to the hall, the sense of an extraordinary shift lingered, anchored by the maintenance worker who had stepped out of the shadows and reminded everyone of the power of calm, clear action in crisis. Sienna took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline wane but the quiet satisfaction swell within. In a room full of extravagance and easy dismissals, she had asserted her presence, not as a spectator but as a protector, and it changed everything. The hum of the gallery's aftermath receded as the murmurs of guests mingled with the distant blare of fire trucks departing. For a moment, Sienna Blake closed her eyes, the echoes of the emergency drifting away beneath a tide of memories suddenly vivid and unavoidable. She saw herself years earlier, standing in the harsh brightness of a hospital emergency room. The sterile walls gleamed under fluorescent lights, but it was the high-stakes urgency that dominated the space. Patients wheeled in on stretchers, paramedics barking orders, families crying quietly in corners. In a navy blue EMT uniform, Sienna moved with practiced precision, her hands steady as she took a pulse, checked an oxygen tank, and administered medication with quiet confidence. She remembered the adrenaline, the undeniable purpose of those moments. The rush of being the one people relied on in their most vulnerable minutes to act, decisions that saved lives, the pride in knowing she made a difference. One afternoon, she was called to the scene of a multi-car accident on a rain-slicked highway. She knelt beside a young man trapped in his smashed car, his arm twisted unnaturally. Sienna calmed him with a gentle voice while carefully immobilizing his injury, while her partner radioed for the trauma team. The moments were tense, but her focus never wavered. Her colleagues often praised her calm in crisis. "You should teach this," a fellow EMT once joked, watching her direct bystanders out of harm's way during a fire evacuation. Those years were the core of her identity, a steady hand amid chaos, a trained healer and protector. But life beyond the ambulance was far from simple. The quiet of her small apartment was often shattered by phone calls about her younger sister, Lila, whose chronic illness demanded constant care. Sienna's evenings blurred into nights feeding machines, managing medications, and wrestling with exhaustion. When the hospital invited her to attend advanced paramedic courses, Sienna hesitated. Could she juggle the demands of the job with the fragility at home? The answer came in whispers, no. Scenes of her quietly setting aside her medical bag to answer another call from her sister's nurse flashed in her mind. The unrelenting fatigue, the evenings spent comforting Lila through feverish nightmares, the mounting guilt for dreams deferred. She tried to stay strong for Lila, promising a better future while slowly surrendering her own. The weight of those years culminated in the heart-wrenching morning when Lila passed away silently in her sleep. Sienna sat beside her, holding her icy hand, grief overwhelming every fiber of her being. The loss shattered the world she had built, gone was the certainty, the drive, replaced by emptiness and a quiet despair. In the months that followed, Sienna drifted away from the paramedic community. She couldn't bear the memories tied to every uniform, every ambulance bay. She took work that paid the bills but demanded little from her emotionally, maintenance jobs, cleaning shifts, roles at private events where she could be unnoticed and anonymous. She knew the sting of invisibility, had grown used to the smirks or patronizing comments about her accent and plain clothes. Yet, despite the distance, the skill and composure gleaned from her past remained embedded within her. Beneath that unassuming exterior lay years of training, experience, and resilience forged in emergency corridors far removed from the glittering world she now served quietly. Her mind wound back to the present as she walked through the hushed corridors of the museum, touching the cool metal railing absent-mindedly, recalling the moment she saw the sparks fly in the light fixture only minutes before. The sharp clarity of her instincts had resurfaced effortlessly, reminding her of who she truly was beneath the layers of muted uniforms and overlooked roles. Her thoughts flicked to her coworkers, some of whom barely acknowledged her existence, and even the laughter she endured from that security guard when he assumed she didn't understand the art or the crowd. She had chosen avoidance over confrontation for years, hiding in plain sight rather than challenging the assumptions that boxed her in. But tonight was different. Tonight, she stepped out instinctively, the old courage surfacing beneath the anxiety. Taking charge had felt natural, despite the glances she caught, the subtle judgments, the silent skepticism from those used to privilege. And yet, the knowledge of her training and the memory of her lost sister gave her a fierce determination in that moment. As she walked back through the quiet, the memory of her last day as an EMT surfaced, handing over her blue jacket, the emblem of her profession, to a reflective colleague who encouraged her to come back one day. But the years rolled by, and she circled further away from the life she'd once dreamed of. Still, the strength never left her. Each night she spent alone painting walls or fixing fixtures was underscored by the quiet hope that maybe one day she would reclaim more than just a paycheck. The surfacing exhaustion tugged at her eyelids, but alongside it came a resolve, tempered in both the pain and purpose of the past. The silence of the museum corridors was no longer empty, it vibrated with the echoes of experience, loss, and a skill waiting to be fully claimed once again. Somewhere deep inside, Sienna recognized the truth she avoided for so long. She was not just a maintenance worker in an indifferent crowd. She was a protector with a history of steady hands and sharp mind, a woman whose quiet past had shaped her response tonight, the very essence of her strength, hidden but never gone. The following morning, the museum's polished halls buzzed not with refined discussions of brushstrokes or sculpture design, but with a different kind of excitement. Guests who had attended the midnight unveiling now arrived early, still stirred by the previous night's unexpected events. News of the explosion and fire spread quickly, and almost everyone spoke in hushed tones about the quiet woman who had stepped forward when others froze. Sienna Blake arrived early for her shift, her uniform still marred by a faint dusting of glass shards from the repairs. As she entered, she noticed something unusual. A cluster of guests standing near the entrance, whispering animatedly and glancing her way. It was the first time she'd seen so much attention directed toward herself at one of these events. One of the museum's directors, a tall woman with sharp eyes named Veronica Mills, approached her hesitantly. "Ms. Blake," she began, voice tinged with both respect and gratitude, "I just wanted to thank you personally for your quick thinking last night. You kept everyone safe." Sienna nodded, keeping her voice low. "I was just doing what anyone would." "No, it was more than that," Veronica insisted. "The way you took charge, calm, efficient, it was impressive." She paused, then smiled warmly. "We'd like to give you formal recognition, if you're willing." For the first time in a long while, Sienna felt the tight knot of invisibility loosen inside her. But she wasn't prepared to bask in the spotlight just yet. As guests gathered in the grand lobby, a few recognized her from the night before and approached tentatively. The woman who had mocked her worn shoes was among them, now embarrassed and offering a quiet apology. "I didn't expect you to handle that so well," she admitted, cheeks flushed. Sienna accepted the jests with a modest nod, feeling a cautious flicker of pride she hadn't allowed herself before. The event's social media buzzed continuously, guests posting videos and images capturing the moment the overhead light exploded and the smoke curled upward. Several clips showed Sienna leading guests away from danger, hands steady as she carried a small child, her voice the calm center amid the chaos. A renowned art critic who had been present posted an impromptu interview online, tearfully describing how Sienna's actions had saved many from panic and possible injury. The video quickly went viral among the city's social circles, swelling into local news coverage praising her courage and composure. Within hours, her name was trending. Comments flooded in, supportive messages, admiration for her bravery, and stories from people who recognized her from other emergency situations. A few even dug up old interviews conducted when she had trained as an EMT, sharing snapshots of her in her crisp blue uniform, her radiant determination shining through the images. Her co-workers, who had once passed by without so much as a glance, now waved greetings or offered hesitant compliments. The security guard who had laughed at her earlier cleared his throat awkwardly and said, "Gotta hand it to you, Sienna. You really pulled everyone through." Even the museum staff no longer ignored her presence. As she moved through back hallways and storage areas, people stopped to say, "Good morning," or "Thanks again for last night." It wasn't just politeness, it was respect. Still, Sienna felt cautiously protective of the fragile change. She was not yet ready to let her guard down completely, but the barrier she had built around herself was cracking. She caught sight of herself in a backroom mirror, plain work clothes, paint stains still faint, dark hair pulled back simply. But her reflection now carried something different. A subtle straightening of her shoulders, a glimmer of strength born from having claimed her worth in the eyes of others. That evening, messages reached her phone, invites to community forums on emergency preparedness, offers from local health organizations to share her experience, and kind words from strangers whose lives she had touched in ways she hadn't imagined. Her story was no longer hidden in the background. It surfaced gently but unmistakably, layered into the fabric of the city's conversation. And just as her public profile grew, whispers of her past life began to emerge as well. Photos from training days, articles praising her skill and dedication as an EMT, and the heartfelt testimonials from patients and colleagues who remembered her professionalism and kindness. Sienna read the comments carefully. The respect was there, genuine and heartfelt, a far cry from the dismissive attitudes she had endured. She heard stories from those who once shared shifts with her, recounting moments when she saved lives brought to hospital doorsteps or calmed panicked crowds. The glowing memories painted a picture of a woman who had once held the community's trust and admiration. Surrounded by these fragments of a past she had buried beneath years of quiet, her resolve began to strengthen. The woman who had been overlooked and underestimated was now seen for the steady heart and steady hands that saved lives. This shift rippled through her daily interactions as well. Colleagues started sharing brief smiles, sometimes inviting her to join conversations she had never been part of. When she sat down to eat in the staff lounge, a few coworkers approached, engaging her in conversations about safety protocols and emergency training. Even guests at the museum, those who once viewed her as invisible, offered sincere greetings and avoided the dismissive stares that had been a constant part of her existence. One afternoon, as she fixed a flickering light in a side gallery, a young boy approached, clutching a small drawing he'd made. "Thank you," he said shyly, holding out the crumpled sketch of a woman in a uniform standing strong beside a blazing light. Moved, Sienna smiled and knelt down to take the drawing. "That's very kind. Remember, courage comes in all shapes and sizes." She pocketed the drawing, the small token of gratitude sealing a moment where her story shifted from one of invisibility to quiet recognition. Throughout the museum, subtle changes in perception wove through the air, as if a window had cracked open, allowing a new light to filter in. No longer just the woman cleaning floors or fixing wires, Sienna found herself acknowledged not for the uniform she wore now, but the experience, the dedication, and the strength she carried within. The ripples of that night's crisis spread farther than anyone anticipated, reshaping relationships and reputations alike. And for Sienna Blake, the shift marked something she hadn't dared imagine, not just acceptance, but the possibility of being seen and valued on her own terms. Weeks had passed since the midnight unveiling at the museum, but the ripple effect of that night continued to grow in ways Sienna Blake hadn't imagined. Each day brought new emails, messages, and calls, some from old contacts in emergency medical fields, others from local organizations eager to connect with the woman who had so calmly prevented disaster. One crisp morning, as she sipped black coffee in a quiet cafe near the museum, Sienna's phone buzzed insistently. The screen displayed a number she recognized, the office of Marcus O'Leary, director of an elite paramedic training program known for rigorous certification and advanced skills development. She answered with caution but curiosity. Marcus's voice was warm but purposeful. "Ms. Blake, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I saw the coverage of your actions during the museum incident. Quite impressive." Sienna exhaled softly. Thank you, but I was really just doing what I'd been trained for. That's precisely why I'm calling, Marcus said. We have an opening in our upcoming paramedic recertification program, a selective spot for experienced professionals looking to update skills and regain certification. We'd be honored if you'd consider joining. Given your background and your recent demonstration of leadership in emergencies, I believe you'd thrive in this role. For a moment, Sienna was silent, the weight of the past years pressing down on her resolve. She thought of all the times she had boxed up her medical bags, silently slipping away from that life to take low-profile jobs to mask the lingering pain. I appreciate the offer, Mr. O'Leary. It's a lot to consider. He smiled through the line. Of course. No pressure. If you'd like, I can send details, and when you're ready, we can talk more. You're welcome anytime. After ending the call, Sienna sat still, tasting a swirl of emotions, hope mingled with doubt, apprehension tempered by cautious excitement. She thought about the gratitude from the museum guests, the respect blooming around her, and the silent strength she'd rediscovered during moments of chaos. Later, surrounded by the quiet buzz of her apartment, she looked at the worn jacket she'd kept folded on a shelf. The EMT emblem, once vibrant, now faded. She traced the stitching with her finger, memories washing over her like waves, training sessions, long nights responding to calls, the warmth of camaraderie with colleagues. Her thoughts drifted to Lila, to the agonizing decision to leave the field, to the late nights wrestling with grief and exhaustion. The longing to return to a meaningful purpose warred with the fear of opening old wounds. Still, the recent accolades, the community's embrace, and the offer on her phone stirred something resolute within. It was as if the fracture in her past had begun to bridge, inviting her back. She shared the news hesitantly with a few co-workers at the museum during a break. They want me to train again, she admitted softly. To get back to paramedic work. One colleague beamed. That sounds amazing, Sienna. You're exactly the kind of person they need. The security guard, now more friend than skeptic, clapped her on the back. You've got this, no doubt. Encouraged by their faith, she arranged a meeting with Marcus the next day, visiting the training center nestled in a bustling part of town. The facility was alive with activity, paramedics preparing equipment, instructors reviewing protocols, the scent of antiseptics mingling with the muted sounds of radios. Marcus greeted her warmly, giving a tour of the classrooms and simulation labs. We push our trainees hard but provide support to help them succeed, he explained. You'll find this environment challenging, but familiar. Days turned into weeks as Sienna immersed herself in the recertification program. The drills tested her physical stamina and mental acuity, forcing her to recall techniques and strategies she hadn't practiced in years. Guidance from instructors, many impressed with her composed leadership in the museum incident, bolstered her confidence. She formed connections with fellow trainees, some veterans returning like her, others newcomers eager to learn. There were moments of exhaustion and frustration, but also flashes of exhilaration as her skills sharpened and her purpose crystallized. Meanwhile, public attention continued to grow. Invitations arrived for her to speak at community safety workshops and workshops on crisis response. Each engagement was an opportunity to share her story and inspire others, a role she had never anticipated but embraced. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling training session, Sienna returned home to find her young daughter waiting by the doorway. Despite long hours spent away, the little girl's smile was unwavering, a reminder of why she persevered. Did you save the day again, Mommy? The child asked, eyes wide and earnest. Sienna smiled and knelt to hug her. I'm trying, sweetheart. Every day, I'm getting stronger. The embrace grounded her, weaving together the threads of love, loss, and renewal. Months later, Standing in the bright training room wearing a crisp new uniform, badge shining, Sienna felt a quiet pride swell in her chest. The journey had been challenging, shadowed by old fears and the sting of faded dreams, but ultimately it led her here, reclaimed, renewed, and unafraid. She glanced around at her fellow trainees and instructors, a community that recognized her worth without question. The woman once invisible now stood fully in her strength, ready to save lives and teach others to do the same. With a confident step, she walked toward the next simulation, the past no longer a barrier but a foundation. Outside, the city bustled with life, unaware of the quiet hero returning to her calling, Sienna Blake, no longer unseen, no longer hidden, ready to face what came next.